Okay, well, we'll get started. We're going to talk today about demand and supply. So this is a popular economics model. So it's a bit of a simplification of reality, but it's a very powerful model. It captures the underpinnings of what happens in markets. With this model, you can get a sense for why you would expect prices to go up and the quantity exchanged in a market to change from time to time. So there's two parts to the model, obviously the demand and the supply. So we cover the demand side first, then we look at the supply side, and then we put them together. When you put them together, then you can use it as a model to explain why you would see price changes and quantity changes. So the demand side, well, first let's just get across the idea of a market. So a market is just it's kind of an abstract concept. It doesn't necessarily have to be a physical location. There's obviously many markets that aren't like the stock market, the foreign exchange market, Bitcoin, things like that. It's essentially a medium by which buyers and sellers voluntarily exchange a particular good or service. So in a market, you have your buyers, they represent demand, and then you have sellers, and they represent obviously the supply. And again, a market doesn't necessarily need to be a physical place. Many markets are like a farmer's market, but many markets aren't. They're virtual, especially nowadays. So there's lots of different places where you have buyers and sellers engaged in voluntary trade. That's not in a particular place. The interaction of the supply and demand in a market determines the price and the quantity. So let's start with the demand curve. So the demand curve is all it is it's simply, when we draw it, we're representing the behavior of buyers. And when I say behavior, all we're doing with this demand curve is representing how much they would buy at different prices. So when you look at a demand curve, it's more of a what if. It's a what if concept, not a what is. We're having, there's different prices, and we're saying what the consumers would want to buy at those different prices. We're not saying they are buying them at those prices. We're saying what if they were to buy them at the, what if the price was $20? How much would they buy? What if the price was $10? How much would they buy? Okay, so again, economics is a bit of an abstract discipline. It's much different than accounting or marketing, where most of that is what is concepts. So it's a little bit theoretical, but I'll try to keep it as simple as possible. So the first thing we need to know for a demand curve is what exactly is quantity demanded. So when we say the word quantity demanded, all what we're saying is that what we're referring to is the quantities that consumers are willing and able to buy over a period of time at various prices. So this is what's called the demand schedule. So all this is a table with the demand curve information. You have the price, and then you have the quantity. So this table is saying that if the price was $17, then the consumers in this market, whatever it could be any good or service, would want to buy 7. So the quantity demanded at $17 is 7 units. At $18, it's 6 units, and so on. At $22, it's $2. Sorry, at 2 units. So what's the relationship between these two variables? Is it positive or negative? And since there's only a few of you here, don't be afraid to use your mic. That's fine. If not, you can use the chat function, whatever suits you. So is there a positive relationship between price and quantity, or an inverse or negative relationship?
Maybe versus proportional?
Yeah, you said inverse, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, and I mean, intuitively this makes sense. The higher the price, the less people buy. Now, I'll get into this a little more, but we're holding any other determinants of the quantity demanded constant here, right? So here we're just looking at the relationship between the price of the good and how much people would want to buy. Of course, there are other variables like income. The price could be the same, but if people's income increase, they might want to buy more. The demand curve just shows the relationship between price and quantity demanded. We will see that changes in these other variables will result in a shift in the demand curve. So if we plot these points, we get a demand curve. So $19.05. So here we put price on the vertical axis and quantity on the horizontal axis. So at this point here, this is showing you that the consumers would want to buy 5 units if the price is 19. They'd want to buy less, they'd want to buy more if the price falls to 18. They want to buy one more, which would be 6. So again, we're just plotting this information here. We won't get into it in this course, but there's a lot of theory behind this demand curve being downward sloping. We could show based on preferences and other theories that the demand curve is negatively sloped. It makes intuitive sense, but there's much more rigor behind why this is downward sloping, but we won't get to that in this course. The main thing you need to know is that there's a negative relationship, it's downward sloping, and when we draw the demand curve, we're holding any other things that affect the quantity demanded constant, okay? And so if any of those other things change, we shift the curve, and we'll talk about that in a moment. And so, again, we're not going to get into the details, but we're just going to say that there's an inverse relationship. That's the law of demand. So we're not going to show you where the law of demand comes from, but we're just going to bring it up. You just need to know it. So it's just saying that the quantity demanded of a good falls when the price of the good rises, other things equal. So inverse relationship. I mean, there are some simple reasons we can think of, to sort of solidify this relationship. But obviously when, the price increases, you think of the opportunity cost of your money. You could buy something else. That's one reason. But, it's just, think about what you can do with your money. There's usually several different products you can buy that would satisfy your wants and desires. And so if the price goes up of a good, it's becoming more expensive, and it's maybe making the other products look more attractive. A reduction in the price of a product means that the specific desire can now be satisfied more cheaply by buying more of that product. So law of demand is just stating that there's an inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. Now, you could have a demand curve for a single person. I mean, I could ask you, let's say tomorrow at lunch, if you were at McDonald's and the price of a Big Mac was $20, how many Big Macs would you buy? Probably be 0. And then I could, give you different prices. I could go from 20 down to $1. And it's probably going to just be a demand curve, something like this first one here, where it's just this discrete jump. You might say 0 until $6, and then you'd buy 1 Big Mac. You might buy 2 if it's $1. So you can have an individual's demand curve, but typically we're looking at an entire market. And so the market demand curve, of course, is just the sum of all of the individual consumers' demand curves. So, and you're thinking of just summing at the different prices. So here we have 3 different people, Abdi, Tamiko, and Jan. And so what's the market demand curve if the price is $22? Well, let's just do $19. That's the example that's in the slide. So if the price is $19, Abdi would want to buy 4, Tamiko would want to buy 6, and Jan would want to buy 8. And so at a price of $19, the market demand curve would be 18. Just the sum of each of these individual quantity demanded. And you would do the same for every price. And then that would trace out your market demand curve. Okay? Does that make sense? Everyone's good?
Yep.
Okay. Yep. So now, when we draw the demand curve, we're just interested in the price and quantity space. And don't worry, we're not going to be working with 3D diagrams. This is just to get the idea across. But if we, there are other variables. For example, income has an effect on how much people would want to buy. So if we wanted to, we could look at just the quantity and income space, and we could see that relationship. But price is one of the most important determinants of the quantity demanded of a good. So we're typically thinking about just the price and quantity space. But, if we wanted to, we could have a 3D diagram where we have income as well. Income is also a determinant of the quantity demanded. Here, then, we would have a demand plane, okay? And so, if we were asked what the quantity demanded is here, we wanted to know that, we would need to be given, we would need to answer the question, well, at what price and what income? And then we would go to the price and income and then go down to the quantity axis and figure out what that quantity is. But we just work in the price and quantity space because 3D diagrams aren't really fun to look at. And so when we draw a particular demand curve, we're drawing it for a given level of income. Whoops, this doesn't look like I can fix that. But anyways, this is just a slice of the demand plane at an income of 40. And so if we want to draw this for an income of 60, then we would just take the slice at 60. And if we're just looking at the price and quantity space, that's, clearly that would just be a shift to the right in income. So any other variables, variables other than the price of the good will shift the curve, okay? So that's the idea. So what are some of the other factors? Well, we talked about one. So two is the consumer incomes that we just talked about. But, preferences are a little harder to measure, but still they exist. People, we're human beings. We have certain preferences, and these preferences can change on the whole for a lot of people. That there's different fads and things like that, trends towards healthy eating. So changes in any of these types of preferences will shift the demand curve. And another thing to point out, when we shift the demand curve, we're saying that if we shift it to the right, we're saying that at every price, the quantity demanded is higher. Okay. So consumer incomes, of course, are something that would shift the demand curve. Now, prices of related products are also important. So, okay, let's think of maybe an example where you're at the mall and there's two restaurants selling pizza. Maybe one is a deep dish pizza, one is a traditional pizza. Now, how do the prices of either of the two goods affect the quantity demanded of either of the two goods? Well, let's say the restaurant that sells the deep dish pizza were to increase their price. Well, that could cause the quantity demanded of the traditional pizza to increase because people might find that price too high and they'll substitute away from the deep dish pizza to the traditional pizza. So when you have substitute goods like that, so these two goods are highly substitutable. They're the same thing with pizza. They're just there's some slight differences in how they're made, and whatever the differences are between traditional and deep dish pizza. Or if you're at the grocery store and you could have yellow beans and green beans. They're almost the same thing. It's just that they have a different color. And so if the price of one goes up, people will tend to buy the other. Okay, so the prices of related products, in this case, substitutes, are an important determinant of the quantity demanded of a good. Complement goods are another example of related goods. So you could think of maybe hamburgers and hamburger buns, right? If for whatever reason the price of hamburger buns were to triple, what would happen to the quantity demanded of hamburgers? Anyone? So let's say the price of hamburger buns triples, maybe there's some kind of a shortage of flour. How would that affect the quantity demanded of hamburgers?
Less hamburgers being sold because the price of burgers buns went up.
Yep, exactly. So, the general relationship here is that if the price of a substitute good goes up, then the quantity demanded of the other good will go up. If the price of a complement good goes up, the quantity demanded of the other good goes down. So that's another determinant. Expectations of future prices or income, that sort of thing. If a lot of people are expecting their income to increase in the future, their quantity demanded now would be higher at every price. But other examples would, if we expect the price of the good to be different in the future, that affects how much we'll buy of it today, right? If we all thought gas prices were going to be $3 a liter tomorrow, the demand tonight for gasoline would be extremely high, right? So expectations can change people's behavior in terms of how much they would buy at different prices in the current period. There's also changes in demographics, population size. This is a little bit related to preferences, I guess you could say. Like baby boomers, you have this huge portion of the population that are all, in a certain age range, and they're all getting to an age where golf, for some reason, is very popular. And so, over the last probably 10 years and probably into another 10 or 15 years, you can make an argument that the demand curve for any goods related to golf will probably increase. So there's certain, demographic trends like that can affect the demand curve. And just in general, if you have a larger if all of a sudden you have double the population, some of them are going to be interested in buying a certain good, so the overall demand in any particular market could be high. Okay, so these are, you could maybe think of some other ones, but these pretty much capture for the most part, things that could affect why people would buy more or less of a good at different prices, which is what the demand curve is. So again, so you need to understand the difference between a shift in the curve and moving along the curve. Okay, so let me just do an annotation here. It might be easier than the slide. So we have a demand curve, right? This is the quantity, this is the price. If I go from this point here to this point here, so I'm going in this direction, what happens to the price? Does it increase or decrease?
Decrease.
Yep. So you can think of going over here. And then what happens to the quantity?
Increase.
Yeah. So it's going to increase. Yeah. So lower price, higher. Now, so the quantity demanded increased because the price fell. Okay. When we move along the demand curve, so when we move along the demand curve, we're moving along the demand curve because the price is changing. Okay. And when we do that, when we talk about the change in when we talk about this change in Q here along the demand curve, we use the word quantity demanded. So it's a little hard to write with this, but we use the term quantity demanded. Now that's different than if the demand curve shifts. If the demand curve shifts to the right, we're saying that any price, the quantity demanded has increased by this horizontal distance. And so, first of all, we don't have a supply curve here. So we have no idea what's going to be purchased in this market, right? We're not determining what the price or quantity is. We're still saying, what if P is this? What's the quantity demanded? And so if the demand curve shifts to the right, then we're just saying that every price, the quantity demanded would be higher. But when we say that the demand curve is shifting to the right, if this happens, we just say demand. We don't put this quantity demanded in here. So all I'm saying is that just in terms of terminology, when you say an increase in demand in the field of economics, we interpret that as a shift in the demand curve. If you say there's an increase in the quantity demanded, we're referring to a movement along the demand curve. Okay? And I'll go back to this when we get the supply curve in there. It might be a little more clear in that case. But anyways, so so that's a movement along the curve. We're just talking about the relationship between the price and the quantity demanded. Now, changes in any other factors will shift the demand curve, as I said. So this demand curve shifting to the right is not caused by price changes. If we're talking about price changes, we're talking about moving along the demand curve, okay? When we shift the demand curve, say to the right like this, we're saying something like income increased or the price of a related good increase, and then people are substituting away from it and buying more of this one, or expectations have changed or something like that. Anything on that list we just looked at, okay? Is that clear?
Yeah.
Okay. So again, this is just what I said here. Let me see if I can clear these annotations. Yeah. So here, it's just reiterating what I said. So demand is just the word demand without the word quantity is used when referring to a shift. And if we use the word quantity demanded, we're referring to a movement along the curve. So let's just do a little test here to see if you were listening and see if you understand the concept. So we're asked here to state how each of the following would affect the demand curve for state. So how would increases in family income affect the demand curve for state? So you could just maybe type this into the chat function if you want, or say it out loud, whatever.
Sorry, are you using A?
Yeah.
Okay.
So if income increases, how do we represent that? Is the demand curve, are we moving along the demand curve or are we shifting it? If we're shifting it, is it to the right or the left?
Shift to the right.
Yeah. Okay, so that would shift it to the right. What about a decrease in the prices of pork and chicken? So pork and chicken, what are those in terms, we're talking about steak. Are pork and chicken related to steak?
No.
Yeah, are they complement goods or substitute goods?
They're complement.
Compliment.
Substitutes, yeah. Because you don't buy them together, right? Complement goods would be like a baseball glove and a baseball, hot dog bun and hot dog.
Hot dog and bun. Okay.
But these are substitutes. So if substitutes become cheaper, what happens to the demand curve for steak?
Decrease.
Demand curve shifts left.
Yeah, exactly. It would shift to the left because now there's substitute goods that are cheaper, and so people may substitute away from steak and buy those other goods. What if there's a trend towards trend among consumers towards white meat and fish? Again, these are meat, so they're kind of a substitute. So this would, we would represent something like this with a shift in the demand curve to the right or left.
Left.
Yeah.
Why would it be the left?
Yeah, why left?
Yeah, because we're basically saying here people are getting their satisfaction from meat. They're more interested in having more healthier white meat and fish rather than steak. So we're basically just saying here that preferences are changing such that people are not interested in steak as much.
Oh, that's all. I didn't read the top part. Okay.
And so an expectation that a railway strike will interrupt shipments of beef from Western Canada.
Increase in demand.
Yeah, so we think the demand now would increase. People would stock up. What about an increase in the price of steak?
Decrease in demand.
There'll be a shift along the curve, wouldn't it? Or no, a new curve.
Yeah, okay, so yeah, that's a trick. It's not really a trick, but so when we talk about this is called the own price. We're talking about the price of the good that we're actually drawing the market for. And
Right.
so here it's a movement along the curve. There's
Right.
no shift here, right?
Right. It's another curve to the right, and so the price just goes right across, so it stays the same.
Yeah, so we would just be, there's the demand curve for steak. An increase in the price of steak, we're just going from a point, say here, to a point, say here. With the price going up and the quantity demanded going down.
Okay.
Okay, so that's the demand curve. So that's, we're going to talk a little bit more, like we haven't talked about what it means if there's a steep demand curve or a flat demand curve. We'll talk about that in the next chapter, but for now, that's all we need. Now we're going to talk about the supply curve. So this is a different component of the model. This is the relationship. We're still in the same space. We're in the price and quantity of the good space. But here, quantity is going to be the quantity supplied, and the price is the same thing. It's the price of the good. And again, this is a what-if concept. We're just going to, we're just asking the question, what if the price were this? How much would firms want to offer for sale at that price? And so we're thinking about the relationship between prices and the quantity supplied. And so, if price increases, then what do you expect the quantity supplied to be? And again, we're holding other things constant, like the input prices and stuff like that. So if all else constant, a firm can get a higher price per unit and their costs are the same, they're going to be making more profit per unit. So can you guess at what the relationship between price and quantity would be here? Would it be a positive or negative relationship?
Positive. They both go up.
Yep, exactly. So quantity supplied here, just to back up a bit, quantity supplied is just how much a firm would be willing able to offer for sale at various prices. So, a lot of the technical stuff here is exactly the same. A supply schedule is, again, just the data for the supply curve. We have the prices listed and we have the quantity supplied. So if the price here is $18, we would say 2 units would be offered for sale. But if the price goes higher, there would be more people that would be willing to offer it for sale. Again, we're not saying anything is sold or anything like that. It's a what if concept. And this makes sense. Again, the higher the price, the more profit per unit. All else constant, the firms would want to offer more for sale. If we plot this, it'll look like this, and note that the price and quantity are both going in the same direction. They both increase with each other. There's the supply curve where it's just we plot these points and it's upward sloping. So not much else to say about that. So this, represents the behavior of firms just in terms of how much they would offer for sale at different prices. Okay, so the law of supply, again, is just, and again, we'll actually derive a supply curve later on in the course. So there's a little more, you can get a better understanding behind why it would be upward sloping instead of just saying that we think it would be because it's intuitive. But we can show that, we can put some more depth to this, but we'll do that later on. So again, when we draw the supply curve though, we're holding everything else constant. And what are some of the other things that we're holding constant? Well, one of them would be the input prices, how much it costs to make, something like if you're thinking about a sandwich shop, well, the bread, the cost of the bread, all of that stuff, we're saying that that's, held constant. The reason why we do that obviously is when you're trying to analyze something, you don't want to, look at 5 different things changing at once and trying to make sense of it. You're saying, okay, if we hold this constant, but you're trying to understand what are the relationships between each of the variables. So anyways, again, it's upward sloping. For now, we're just going to say that, a higher price means that the firm can make more money per unit, and so they want to offer more for sale. Same as the demand curve, the market supply curve is just the sum of all the individual market participants. In this case, their quantities supplied at different prices. So if you have 2 different firms, or you could think of maybe these are people selling on eBay some type of product. The market supply curve is just the horizontal sum of each of the individual market participants. Okay, so nothing similar idea here, concept as how we did the demand curve. Now, what are the things that shift the supply curve? So again, we're looking at just the price and quantity space, but there are other things other than the price that could change, that could make firms want to offer more or less for sale, okay, at those different prices. We're going to say that one of the most important things would be the price of inputs. So the price of things that you need to buy to actually make the good or service that we're talking about. So if the price of labor increases, we're going to say that at any price, the firm would want to supply less. Taxes, similar idea. This is also a cost of an input. It's different, it is sort of an input price, but it's, taxes are more not really related to how much you produce, whereas this would be more related to how much you produce, right? But anyways, nevertheless, the effect is the same. So if taxes were to increase, we would say that firms would supply less. Technology would be another example. Here, when we say technology, we're talking about technology that would lead to some improvement in productivity. So if you have an increase in productivity and you own a firm, then, you're going to, you're basically getting a larger profit per unit. So you'd want to supply more at different prices if there's some improvement in your so these are all kind of related. Like an improvement in technology would, in a sense, make your unit cost of inputs a bit cheaper per unit because because of this technology. So anyways, these shift the supply curve. And so if there's an increase in the price of productive resources, that would shift the supply curve to the left. There's an increase in taxes, that would shift it to the left. If there's an improvement in technology that affects productivity, that would shift the supply curve to the right. Prices of substitutes in productions is another thing. All we're saying here is that a good example would be if you were a firm, maybe you're a cereal manufacturer and you're selling different types of cereals. But suppose one of them, there's a real huge increase in demand. And at the moment, you're having trouble meeting that demand. And, you could even think that the price would be, you could get a higher price, right? Because there's so much demand. But, and just think, or you would want to think of multiple companies selling that same cereal. And so if there's a huge increase in demand, and then there'd be a period where the firms haven't increased the amount that they produce of this to put in the stores, the price could be bid up, right? And you'd get a higher price. And so if that's the case, you want to dedicate more of your resources towards making that cereal as opposed to the other cereals you make. That's sort of the idea. We won't really do much with that in this course. Future expectations. So expectations is another thing. If we suppose you had a business making something at home and selling it on eBay. Well, 2 months before Christmas, you might be thinking, well, and maybe you have some other things to do, and you don't have as much time to make the products. You might be thinking, well, in a month or two from now, the demand's going to be much higher because it's going to be Christmas time. So I might offer less for sale now and put more for sale at Christmas time, where I think I might be able to get a higher price. So that's the idea here. And then, of course, the more firms in a particular market, the more the supply curve would be shifted to the right. Okay, so the number of firms in the market offering the good or service for sale, the more of them there are, the larger is the quantity supplied at every individual price. Okay, so let's do another practice question. So this is similar to before, but now we're thinking about the supply curve. So this asks us to, basically say what would happen to the supply curve. Would it shift to the right or the left in each of these scenarios? So the first, an increase in imports of shoes from South America. So let's suppose the shoe market, so we're thinking about a specific type of shoe, and all of a sudden now maybe they got rid of tariffs, and now all of a sudden foreign companies can sell into this market. How would we represent the supply curve in this situation if that happened?
Curve to the right.
Yep, exactly.
So we would price
to the right. We're just saying, at each of the different prices, there's going to be more offered for sale because there's going to be more firms. What about improvements in the efficiency of shoe manufacturers? So this is technology.
To the right.
To the right, so.
Yep, so we would shift it to the right. What if there's an increase in the cost of shoe leather?
To the left.
Everyone agree?
To the right.
Yeah. So this is an increase in the cost, so it would make it more expensive per unit, so it would shift it to the left. What about expectations that prices will be higher in a month?
Right. More people will be buying.
Yeah, so how would the supply curve
Go down the curve?
Would it shift left or right now? So if you're running that eBay business and a month from now you can sell your stuff at a much higher price, what's your supply gonna, the amount you offer for sale gonna look like now?
Less.
Yeah. So we're saying we would shift the supply curve to the left.
Yeah, we'll offer one unit on 10,000 units.
Yeah, you just want to, you might not want to offer as much for sale now because the price, you're expecting the price to be higher in the future. Now, what if there's a change in the price of the shoes themselves?
There'd be no shift at home.
Yeah. Okay, good. So you got the trick this time. Perfect. Yeah, this would just be a movement along the supply curve.
Okay.
Okay, so now
when there's a price increase in shoes, there's no shift. The reason there's no shift is because we're not selling more quantity and we're not increasing pricing. That's okay. So price is the main. You could think of it this way. The price of the good is related to the quantity supplied of the good is related to or a function of the price of the good, then input prices and any of those other things that we had on that list. When we draw a supply curve, we just draw it in the quantity and price space, right? And so when we draw this thing, we're just looking at this relationship, the price of the good and the quantity supplied. So if we talk about changes in this thing, then that's what we have on the graph, right? So we're talking about moving along the curve. But these other things, like we put input prices here, right? So if any of these things change, we just shift the curve, okay? Mm-hmm. And that same similar idea, we could have a supply plane where we have the other variable, and then you could see if that other variable changes, it would be like taking a slice out of, a slice at a higher level or lower level, right? So that's why I showed that diagram, so you get the feel for that. But that's the idea. You're just, we're just looking at the price and quantity space when we draw that, because this is the most important or more interesting determinant of the quantity.
for quantity demanded when we're talking about the demand curve, and quantity supplied when we're talking about the supply curve. And so that's what space we work in. The other things just shift the curve. Okay.
So your writing's bad on there. It looks like I'm actually writing a book, so I think it's pretty damn good.
It's hard to write with the mouse. Okay, so let's put these things together. So we just looked at the supply and demand separately, but now when we put them together, that forms our model of a market. And so we're just saying that, in a market, so we're not going to look at the interactions in detail or anything like that. We're just saying that when you have buyers and sellers in a market, we're going to say that there's going to be a tendency for the price and quantity to adjust to where those two curves intersect. And we'll talk about why we think that in a minute. But the main idea, it's a very simple model. And basically with this model, if something happens that would shift the demand curve to the right, for example, we can predict how the price would change and how the quantity on the horizontal axis would change. So basically when you put the two curves together, we're going to say that at that intersection, that's going to be the equilibrium price, we'll call it, and the equilibrium quantity. And so that's how both of them together determine the price and quantity in a market. So let's look at a diagram to clarify that. So we have our demand curve. This is just showing us what the consumers would buy at different prices. We have the supply curve. This is just showing us what the firms would want to buy or offer for sale at the different prices. Now, big deal, so this intersection point here is at a price of 20 and 16. Now, we're going to say that this is the equilibrium quantity and price, and we're going to say that the market will tend to go towards this price and quantity. Why? Well, the best way to think about it is to consider what would happen if the price wasn't $20. So let's suppose that, do that on the next diagram, let's suppose that the price was above the price of $20. Well, what would that suggest? Well, if the price is here above the $20, we can look over at the demand curve. And if we go down, this number here would be the quantity demanded. So this is a pretty high price. So, much less, there's going to be a lot less quantity demanded than at the price of 20, right? Not as many people would want to buy it. But at a price here, much above 20, there's going to be a lot of firms that would want to offer it for sale. And so if the price was this and the buyers responded to this price, they would want to buy this amount. But the firms responding to this price would want to offer for sale this amount. And so what you would get is a surplus. You would get that there's too many goods being offered for sale. There's more than what people want to buy. So you could think of maybe an example where you have a farmer's market and, if you're thinking of the farmer's market, if the firms thought that the price was going to be this, they're going to bring this much vegetables with them, this very high number. But at that price, and if, the consumers were to have to pay this price, they wouldn't buy much. They would buy a little amount. So for any price above the equilibrium price, this intersection price, we would have a surplus. And what do you think would happen? So let's say this was the price temporarily and you had a surplus. What would be the tendency here? How would the price change? What would be the incentive for the firms here? Would they want to? Price? Yeah, the price, there's a clear tendency here for the price to fall. If firms are realizing that they're not able to sell all of their stuff, how do they sell it all? Well, they would have to lower the price. So there'd be a tendency for the price to fall. And so anything above here, there'd be a tendency for it to go back down. Now, if the price is below this equilibrium price, what do you get? Well, here, if the price is very low, the quantity demanded is going to be very high, but at a low price, not as many firms would want to offer it for sale. Some might not even find it. Some might have a very, if you're thinking of people who are doing an internet business, if the price is too low, they might not find it worth their while. The opportunity cost of their time is too high. Or maybe there's some people that have nothing else to do, so there's not much of an opportunity cost of their time. Or, some firms might just be really, really good at being efficient, and so they still make a profit at a lower price. And so what do we call it when we have excess demand, or the quantity demanded is much larger than the quantity supplied. What would be a word for that? It starts with an S too, but it's not a surplus.
Shortage.
Shortage.
Yep. So it's a shortage. And so if there's a shortage, there'd be a tendency for the price to be
Increased.
yeah. Well, yeah, we could think of it being bid up. So, there's a clear story here about why a market would tend to go towards this equilibrium price. And so,
all increases move to the right, all decreases move to the left.
Oh, sorry, say that again.
All increases so far we've been through move to the right, decreases always move to the left.
You mean decreases increases in the price, or?
I mean, basically, all our scales that we've been looking at, everything that moves to the left is a decrease. Or my brain's just not processing.
It depends on. If you're talking about the demand curve, as you move to the right along the demand curve, the price is getting lower and people are willing to buy more, right? Mm-hmm. But on the supply curve, it's the opposite. As you move to the right, prices are increasing, and firms want to offer more for sale. So, let me know if you have let me know if it's still unclear in a bit. So again, we're just, we have a story for this line here. This is just telling us what people want to buy at different prices. This line's telling us what firms would offer for sale at different prices. And if they're together in a market, the only price that would be stable is the price that it corresponds to the intersection of the two curves. And I forgot to mention, this is the only price in which the quantity demanded will equal the quantity supplied. So the center point is a nice happy point where the price is such that the firms are selling exactly what they're offering for sale. There's no surplus or shortage. Sometimes this is also called the market clearing price.
So the invisible hand, isn't that where the markets just kind of realign?
Yeah, that's the idea. Although that's a more general concept. So when you talk about the invisible hand, you're getting into the allocation. So, let's not, it's a long explanation, but it's related to this. But we'll cover a bit of that later, but we could think of the demand curve as the marginal benefit curve of a good. So, any price here, there's someone that values the product, right, at that level. So just take my word for it. You can think of this as a marginal benefit curve. And then as we'll learn later, you can think of this as a marginal cost curve. And so when you have markets will only result in the quantity of the good being produced if the marginal benefit of the good exceeds the marginal cost. And when we talk about cost in economics, we're also talking about opportunity cost. So if you're thinking in general if you think of like command economies, like communist countries, they tried to allocate people to jobs and scarce resources in what should be produced, right? They try to do that manually and control it and dictate it. And that's very hard to do. And so what you don't want in an economic system is to have, say think of like a nuclear engineer, right? Someone who's very talented, and if they're working as a nuclear engineer, they're providing a lot of value doing whatever they do. You don't want to have that person making sandwiches in a sandwich shop. That would be so in that case, you'd be over here to the right. So you would have someone with a very high cost producing for someone who doesn't value the good as much, right? The main idea of the invisible hand is that if you have everything's run by a market will only produce the quantity of the good that, so this is the marginal benefit, this is the marginal cost. So this difference here is the total value of this, whatever it is being produced. And so a market will only produce up to this intersection point. And if you notice, that is where the marginal benefit and marginal costs are equal. Anything to the right of this, the marginal cost would be greater than the marginal benefit. So anything over here is going to be where the cost of making something is, there's negative value into producing any quantity above this equilibrium amount. So if your whole economy is run with markets, there's an automatic mechanism so that scarce resources and people are all allocated efficiently, and that doesn't cost anything. And here again, with the invisible hand, everyone's just looking out for their own self-interest. You buy a good because you want to buy it because you like it. The firms are only interested in making a profit and offering it for sale if they can make a profit. But that ends up being resulting, in theory anyway, to a really, a benevolent social planner could not do any better than that. That's the idea. I mean, there's a lot of caveats to that and stuff, but you can clearly see that anytime we've experimented with a communist country, communist or socialist, and socialist, when I say socialist, not like what people in the U.S. think Biden is. A socialist economy is one where all of the means of production are owned by the government. Everything. So there's no private property rights, private businesses, nothing. And they have a centralized plan and they try to organize but every time we've experimented with that system, it's failed miserably. Anytime we've experimented with the market system, we get a much higher standard of living. And so part of the reason is because of this allocated efficiency. But anyways, that's beyond the scope of what we need to know for this lesson. But yeah, so that's roughly how it's related to the free hand of the market. I think there's a little bit of discussion about this in the chapter here, but not in too much detail. So yeah, like the Karl Marx came up with the idea of communism and all that, and it turned out not to be the best idea. Okay, so this diagram here is basically what I just went over. I just put it in so you have something, an extra example to look at when you're studying. Again, the equilibrium price and quantity is where we would expect the market to go because any other price would result in a surplus or shortage. So now what happens if one of these curves shifts? So let's suppose we have a market. It's stable right now. It's equilibrium price and quantity. And then suppose that, I don't know, maybe the consumers in this market have a higher income. Well, we would represent that with a shift to the right in the demand curve, right? And so at this old price, what do we have? So now the demand curve is here, right? So we can almost imagine that this has disappeared now. So at $20 now, we would have a shortage. And so that's going to result in the price being bid up. And it would go up until you get to this new intersection point. And so, it's a very simple model, but, we could say that, and it's kind of intuitive, but at least we have a little bit of a framework to think about it and say why. But, if the demand, just think intuitively, if you have some kind of a market for a good or service, if the demand increases, meaning that people are willing to buy more of it at any given price, then we would expect in that market for there to be an increase in the price and an increase in the amount that's exchanged. And that's exactly what this would predict. So we just need to so this is the shortage, and then we would, there'd be a tendency now for the market to settle here, where the price is $22 and the quantity is now 18. And so, this model would predict that the price would increase and the quantity exchange would increase. Now, how much these change depends on the slopes of these curves, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next chapter. Okay, so if we have a shift to the left in the demand curve, so incomes fall, or there's just some kind of a, fad away from whatever this good is. Maybe it's cigarettes. You can think of the demand curve for cigarettes over 20 years would have shifted to the left. And so if it was in a pure market, of course, a lot of things in real world don't meet the assumptions we're using this simple model, because a lot of times they're not. We haven't mentioned it here, but we're also assuming a competitive market with lots of firms and stuff like that. But a lot of the times, the firms have, there are oligopolies and, as much of a competitive market as you would like. And then there's also, unions involved on the labor side. There's all kinds of complications in the real world. But if you had, and also I should mention, when we discuss economic model, we're kind of thinking of that as a benchmark. So it's like this is a simple framework to begin thinking about it in, and then what complications to it if you see in the real world that it's not following the simple model, then you have something to go by, and then you can see what exact assumptions maybe you're failing here. But it gives you a better way to analyze real world phenomena. So anyways, here we just have a shift to the left in the demand curve. And so what would that predict? Well, that would predict that the price would fall. So the price here is somewhere over here, and the new price is higher, right? If you're comparing this to this, and then the quantity is also higher if you're comparing this to this. So we can actually just look at this. We could just write it out here. So if demand shifts to the left, the price is going to fall because we're going from this initial price down to this price. I think I said the opposite. Sorry, I didn't make a mistake. So the price is going to fall, and we were here, but now we're here. So the quantity is going to fall. I think I mistakenly said it was increasing before. Sorry about that. But in this case, it's both the quantity and the price are falling. Now, what if we had the supply curve also shift? Well, in this case, if we look, so you have to kind of just keep track of everything here. So when we're at the initial point here and we go here, price and quantity fall. Now, though, if supply shifts to the right, what's going to happen to the price? The price will fall again. We're comparing here to here. And if you compare this to this, the original, clearly the price has fallen. So let's just fill that in. So we know if supply shifts to the right, the price will also fall. Okay? Now, what happens to the quantity just as a result of this supply curve shifting? Well, we were here, now we're here. So just looking down here, the quantity increased. Now, if we didn't have a diagram and I just said that the demand curve shifted to the left, and the supply curve shifted to the right, what of these two would you be certain of, but which one would you be not sure if I didn't show you a diagram? And I just said the demand curve shifts to the left and the supply shifts to the right.
The demand would be for.
Yeah, exactly. You know for sure if demand shifts to the left and supply shifts to the right, the price will fall for sure. But the quantity change depends. It depends on which one of these two shifts are larger. So in the way this is drawn, we go from here to here to here. And so we initially had a quantity here, and then we end up at a quantity here. So the quantity fell, right? So the demand shifting to the left, that impact on the quantity dominated the impact of the supply shifting to the right. And that's because you could just tell by looking at it, the demand curve shifted to the left by more than the supply curve shifting to the right. And so this quantity increase is less than this quantity decrease. So in this example, the quantity fell, but if this supply curve shifted more over to the right, so if it, say, shifted here, then we would have that the quantity would have increased as well. So again, we would go from here to here and then to here. And so comparing A to C, we can see that the quantity increased in the end. So we originally here, what happened to the quantity? Well, because of the demand curve shifting to the left, it fell, but then from the supply curve shifting to the right, it increased from here to here, so this whole distance. And so the net increase is positive. But if the supply curve only shifted a little bit, or less than the demand curve, then the quantity we'd be initially here, and then here the quantity would have overall fallen. So bottom line is, when you have two curves shifting at the same time, you'll only be able to know what, if you're not told how much, if you don't have a diagram or not told how much the curves shift, then you can only say one of them for sure. In this case, you could just say the price fell for sure, but the quantity would be indeterminate unless we know exactly how much they shift. And that's just because they're moving in opposite directions. So you need to know the magnitude of each of these to know which one dominated the other. Okay, does that make sense? So I'll go, there's a summary of all these. So we'll do this question at the end. I have a summary of all the different shifts, and then we can take a look at that. So here, we'll do another practice question.
Just a quick question. You have a summary. Do you put that up as a PDF or a Word document afterwards?
Yeah, these are all posted on the...
In your lecture notes?
I'll just make sure they are. They should be.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So, yeah, if you just go to the site and then I put little, lesson notes right there. Just click on this thing.
Thank you.
And yeah, they're all there.
Thanks,
So,
sir.
I've got one question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just on the on the equilibrium, I guess. So if you gave us, like, if this was the case and we started with demand and then you go DOD1 and then the equilibrium goes down, goes shifts down, and then so you shifted D to D1 and then you did SO to S1, so you could follow the equilibrium pretty easily there. Now, what if you started with supply and you shifted supply first and then demand? Would that make a difference with the equilibrium?
No, because both we're basically saying they're happening at the same time. In that, we're thinking about, okay, if they both shifted at the same time, what would be the net result? And so you can go individually and look at each one, and then saying in the end it'll be this. But it depends on the context of the question. If I had a question that said, what's the new equilibrium, or maybe I could give you that diagram where you have the zeros and ones, and which. I could say something like, if just the demand curve shifted as indicated, what would be the effect of the equilibrium? And that would be clear. You just look for where D1 intersects S0. It should be clear in the context.
Yeah. Okay.
What's going on.
I think I got it. I just was curious if it.
No, that's a fair question. Yeah. Okay, so let's look. So we have some scenarios here, and then I just want you to indicate. Don't worry too much about the market, but just, whatever. So obviously this is the market for a certain pizza, right? But the main thing I want you to recognize here is, reading this scenario, I want you to determine which curve shifts, either the demand curve or the supply curve, and then which direction it shifts, and then what would its impact be on the price and quantity. The new, what's the new equilibrium price and quantity? Like, compared to the old one, what, did the price increase or decrease, or the quantity increase or decrease? Or is it indeterminate? Because you can't know unless I tell you how much. Oh, in this case, we're just doing one shift here, so you don't need to worry about that. You'll know for sure whether the price or quantity changes, okay? So here it's just one curve shifting, and then you just need to figure out what the direction is, and then how does that affect the price and quantity. So I'll just give you a sec to, I'll give you a few seconds to read it over, and you can just speak out whenever you know the answer.
Would the supply go to the left and the price would go up?
Yep. So here, the market would be pizza. Now we're talking about the price of an input, right? And so on our list of things that shift a demand curve, we didn't say anything about price of inputs, right? The consumers don't buy, when you buy something, your quantity demanded for a good or service doesn't depend on the price that the company pays for their inputs, right? That's, something relevant to the supply curve. And so in this case, we're saying the price of flour is more expensive, and we know that an increase in input price shifts the supply curve to the left. So we know it's supply, we know it's going to shift it to the left, and so I'll just draw a market here to illustrate it. So we have demand and supply. So this would be the initial demand and supply. And then all we're saying is that the supply curve shifted to the left. So I can label this maybe S1, and this would be S0. This is D0, where the zeros are the original. Now, so clearly you can see now what would happen to the price. The price will, it will increase, right? So we're initially here, and then we're going here. So the price clearly increases. What happens to the quantity in this market?
Goes down.
Yep. And so that's it. So that's all these are asking for. To just one shift, like one of the curve shifts, what happens to the equilibrium?
All these diagrams I've been trying to read through and understand them, just right there, the way you just did it, explains so much.
Oh, that's good.
Jumped right up like, boom, now I can understand, because I couldn't understand how you were figuring out math, but in a different way. That's awesome.
So yeah, I probably should have maybe went over it a little better at the beginning, but yeah, that's good to hear though. So yeah, price and quantity. So hopefully the next one will be clear too. So again, with these questions, when you're reading it, you're trying to figure out, okay, What are they talking about here? Is this something related to the demand curve or the supply curve? So in the next question, we have that the manufacturers of hot dog buns are happy because the makers of hot dogs have cut their prices in half. So in this case, we're focusing on hot dog buns. That's the market. And so I'll make you think for a sec, what, is this a demand or supply curve thing?
I have a question about this question, actually. Will this question not be geared more towards profit? Since even if, let's say, the maker cuts the price of their hot dogs in half, it doesn't necessarily change demand or supply. It just puts more money into the vendor's pocket. Does it not?
But so in this question, we're saying we have a market for hot dog buns, and now we know that the demand or quantity, well, let's just say demand in general for hot dog buns is related to the price of related goods, right? We know that if the price of a complement good, which is what this is, will affect the demand for hot dog buns. So if hot dogs are much cheaper now, people are going to buy more of hot dogs, right? So you can't argue that. So definitely, we got to look at things in isolation. So just this, all we're saying here is we have the price of a related good falling. And and what kind of a related good is? It's a complement good. So if all of it, just think about it at the grocery store. If the price of hot dogs is $1 a package instead of $3 a package, just something extreme, so you get the point. People are going to buy, you can't argue that people will buy more of the hot dogs, right? Because they're a heck of a lot cheaper. They're, cut in half or more of the price. What do they buy to go along with the hot dogs? They're going to buy more hot dog buns, because usually people don't just eat the hot dogs by themselves, right? And so here, this price cut, even though it's another good, these goods are related. If I said here manufacturers of hot dog buns are happy because the makers of computer monitors cut their prices in half, well, then we have a problem, right? Then there would be no shift in the supply or demand curve for hot dog buns, because those two products are completely unrelated. But here, these products are related. And so so is this the demand or supply? Where did we talk about price of related goods? Yeah, demand.
To the right.
So and that would shift it to the right. And so we would expect that in this market, the price of hot dog buns would increase and the quantity would increase as well. So again, and I just want to be clear, we know in the real world that if this happened at the grocery store, likely the price of the hot dog buns wouldn't change all that much, usually because it's a very temporary thing. A lot of times they would do this if they screwed up their forecasting and made too many hot dogs, and so they just want to quickly reduce their inventory. But you really do see, for the most part, prices don't change too much along with market prices. But that's because we're just assuming a very simplistic thing. We've abstracted from a lot of other things in the world. We're just trying to get a understanding of a pure market, how that would operate, and then of course in the real world you see that it doesn't all. But it will, if for example, have you looked at how much paper towels and toilet paper are now at the grocery store? So for 50 years, you didn't see the prices change much of those. If they did change, it was again just some temporary thing, just so they produce so much, or they'd have a sale once in a while. But now the prices are very high because there is a bit of a shortage. And then there is a bit of an increase in demand because a lot of people are just buying more of them now because they're worried that they might have a shortage, even though it's not really rational. But, you can see those prices will change. Or look at the price of those cheap masks that we wear. Those things before COVID were dirt cheap, but there is a very huge demand for them now. And the prices are really expensive for those. So you do see the workings of a market happening, but sometimes it just takes a little bit of time, or the effects need to be very large. And grocery stores and things like that, they don't like changing their prices too much. But there's a lot of markets where the price changes daily. Like look at gasoline. It changes daily. There are other, so there's lots of other things going on, but you can't get it. These are fundamental things. Like if there's a shortage of a good and it goes on long enough and there's no government intervention or anything, then there's going to be a tendency for that price to rise, right? A lot of times though in the real world, there's a lot of things going on all at once, right? The demand curve and supply, though, these things shift hour to hour, and so it's a lot more complicated. But this just gives you a good, it's a first year basic economics course, right? So we're just getting the key ideas.
Yeah, no.
Does that make sense?
No, it does. I was just thinking about it more as an individual hot dog vendor inside of the street than it was as a whole. So my apologies if I got confused in my thinking.
But but it's good to always criticize, what you're learning, so that's how you learn it much better, and maybe you will, there could be something wrong, but this is a very simplistic model. So to be able to have a model that is very good at predicting real world economic phenomenon is very difficult because, humans are very irrational and unpredictable at times, but, we're just getting the main underpinnings, the basics. We're taking all this noise and just making a nice little simple model that captures the main behavior. And then you can always complicate that with making a more complicated model to capture more things. So anyways, the next one here is talking about a new technique that was discovered by soap manufacturers that substantially reduces the time and labor required to form and shape a bar of soap. So I'll give you guys a sec to think about that. So, right away, did we talk about, technology and efficiency? Was that in our list of determinants of demand? Oh, hello?
Yep.
Okay, good. I thought I had the connection off. So this is clearly a supply thing.
Yep. Supply.
Everyone agree? And so, how does the supply curve shift here?
To the right.
To the right.
To the right. Yep. And then if the supply curve shifts to the right,
Price goes down.
Yeah.
Quantity goes up.
Yep. So, and again, like you could think of it intuitively, if you have an increase in the supply of a good. So for whatever reason, at every price, there's more firms wanting to offer something for sale. But at the same time, the demand, the consumer's behavior doesn't change. They still want to buy the same amounts at different prices. What would you expect would happen in this market? Well, you have more, the good is less scarce. There's more of it around for people trying to sell it. And, people don't want to buy any more of it at the same price. That's the same. You would expect the price to fall and there'd be more exchanged in the market. It just kind of makes intuitive sense. And that's exactly what the model predicts. It predicts that the price would fall and the quantity would increase. Now, I want to point out something. Remember we were talking about the movement along a curve and all that? So don't get confused here. So we had supply shift to the right. So if I asked you, did demand increase here? Well, given our terminology, you would say no, the demand curve never shifted. But did the quantity demanded increase here? Yes. We moved along the demand curve from this point to this point via a shift to the right in the supply curve. Okay, so the quantity exchanged is increasing and the price is falling. So, yeah. So anyways, that's the answer to that. Get rid of this. And so price falls and the quantity increases. Okay, now the last one, let me know what you think of this one. So here we're talking about the market for fine dining. Are we talking about the demand curve here or the supply curve?
Demand.
Yep. Everyone agree?
Because it's income, right? Opposed to...
You're basically saying here, a lot of... Yeah, exactly. Your customers are highly paid executives, and maybe you could think of this, maybe you can think of the financial crisis we had in 2008, 2009. A lot of them lost their jobs, their incomes are lower. We're clearly talking about demand here. There's nothing here about, input prices or productivity or business taxes or any of the things that we listed for the supply curve. This is more about, incomes falling of consumers. And so the demand curve here would shift to the left. And then if the demand curve shifts to the left, does the price increase or decrease?
Decrease.
Yeah. And then
quantity decrease too.
Yeah. So here, remember, or you should recognize that if the demand curve shifts, the price and quantity move in the same direction. So if the demand curve shifts to the right, both price and quantity increase. If the demand curve shifts to the left, both price and quantity decrease. If the supply curve shifts, they move in opposite directions, right? If it shifts to the right, the price will fall and the quantity will increase. And again, intuitively, you could think if the supply curve shifts to the right, but the demand curve doesn't shift, we're basically saying there's more firms selling at each price, but the consumers still want to buy the same amount at each price. Basically, the good's less scarce, it's more abundant, but the demand hasn't changed. So you would expect there to be a lower price and more of it would be exchanged. So here it's going to be down because the demand curve shifted to the left. I forget what this slide is. Oh yeah, so this is just another this is another one where we shift two curves. So let's see if this makes a little more sense. So in this case, we first have the demand curve shift to the left. So, what happens to the price and quantity then if the demand curve shifts to the left? That we actually just did that in the last part of this question. So the price will fall, right?
Quantity and price fall.
Yeah, both will fall. Now we also have that the supply curve shifts to the right. So what happens to the price when the supply curve shifts to the right?
Price goes down.
Yep.
Quantity goes up.
What happens to the quantity?
Goes up.
And so if I didn't tell you what the magnitudes of these shifts were, and you just knew that the demand curve shifted to the right and the supply curve shifted, if the demand curve shifted to the left and the supply curve shifted to the right, you couldn't tell me what the quantity change was unless you knew the magnitude. So that would be indeterminate. So we know for sure the price will fall, but the quantity will be indeterminate. Actually, this might be this. Is this the same as the other? I'm not sure. I think it should be different. I think the other one, the demand curve shifted to the right, but I can't remember. But anyways, you get the point. And then if the supply curve shifted more than the demand curve, then, in this case, the quantity would fall because the demand curve effect dominates. But if the supply curve shifts much more than the demand curve, then this, the quantity change associated with the supply curve would dominate. Okay, so I just at the end here, I gave you I think this is from a different textbook. I don't know if it was from this textbook or another, but I find it useful because it shows you all of the different shifts. So here's a shift in the supply. That's what the arrows tell you what happens to the price and quantity. This is a shift to the left in the demand curve. The arrows tell you here that both fall. And then you have just supply shifting, and then the rest here have two curves shifting. And so where these question marks are where it's indeterminate. In all of these diagrams, though, they shift the supply and the demand curve by exactly the same amount. And so if they shift by exactly the same amount, then the one that's indeterminate just wouldn't change, right? So here, the supply curve shifts to the right. So that would increase the quantity, but then the demand curve shifts to the left, which would decrease the quantity by exactly the same amount. And so, oh wait, sorry, did I mess that up? So, sorry about that. Yeah, so originally here, and then we go here. So, my mistake. So, when you shift the demand curve to the right, that would cause the price to increase, right? But it also causes the quantity to increase. And then we also have that the supply curve here is shifting to the right. So when the supply curve shifts to the right, the quantity also increases. And so the quantity increases for sure, but the price will fall here. So when you shift the demand curve to the right, the price increases, but when you shift the supply curve to the right, the price decreases. And so they exactly offset each other. So there would be no change in price in this diagram. And again, if you didn't know how much these shifted, you wouldn't know what the price change was, but you would know the quantity change for sure. So I think the best thing to do for studying for this is just to, I would just sit with a blank sheet of paper and then see these underneath the diagrams. Maybe get a blank sheet of paper, write these all out, and then just see if you can do the diagrams yourself. And then when you get, if you can't remember or get it, just check what the answer is and then write it again. And then you'll it's not that difficult. It's just a few times you practice this, just writing it down, you should be, it'll be a piece of cake. Okay, so let's move on to elasticity. Oh wait, let's do some multiple choice. Do you want to do the multiple choice questions for each chapter at the end, or do you want to do some multiple choice questions now before we do the next chapter?
Do them now.
Okay, yeah, let's do them now. So this is, supply and demand. Yeah, we'll probably not finish the elasticity chapter. So yeah, we'll do the multiple choice questions for them next class. So we might get I'll try to make sure we're caught up with the material. You might have to maybe cover half a chapter on your own or something. It depends on the time, but I think we have, let me just check our weekly schedule. So yeah, we got a bit of a buffer here before the midterm. So we'll cover half of the elasticity, then we'll cover it next. We might shift these down a little bit, but and then some of these aren't going to be too long, these sections. So okay, so let's do some multiple choice questions. I can open up a poll here on this WebEx. I can find it.
So do we have a quiz next week then, or no?
Oh, good point. Sorry. I think we'll do the quiz after the class. I think that just makes the most sense, but obviously I'll lecture a little bit less. And I'll probably make this just on 1 and 3 and a little bit. It'll just be a little bit of 4. Whatever we cover for 4, that's only what I'll put on there, okay?
Okay.
Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. I thought it might have, it's pretty soon already. But it'll just be on chapter 1, 3, and a little bit of 4. And that'll depend on what we finish tonight with chapter 4. Okay, so let me just find the pooling option here, which somehow has disappeared. Oh, okay, I found it. Okay, so you should have a pool that you see. And the first question is right here. So the term quantity demanded refers to which one is correct? Okay, I'll do 3 seconds. I'll just give you a 3-second countdown. 3, 2, 1, and 0. Oh, someone hasn't submitted their response. Can you see the poll results? Anyone?
Yep.
Okay, good. Yeah, so the correct answer here is A. So again, the quantity demanded is when we're talking about a movement along the curve. And again, we're talking about, we use the word quantity demanded when we're talking about a change. And, we're talking about moving along the curve. But also, this question is more just saying, what is the term quantity demanded? Well, it's referring to how much the consumers would buy at a different price. Okay, so in which statement is the term demand used correctly? Okay, let me just open the poll. For some reason, each time for the poll, I have to open up this file, which is not even here. What's going on? Okay, go ahead. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Okay, can you see the poll results? So
yep.
Here, okay, so here let's start with the second one. This says a decrease in the price of airline tickets. Okay, so let's say this is the demand curve for airline tickets. I'll just put AT for airline tickets. And we're saying the price goes down. Now, did we say that the price of the good itself would shift the curve? No. So it says here a decrease in the price of airline tickets led to an increase in the demand without the word quantity. So this is saying that a decrease in the price would lead to a shift in the curve. No, that's not correct. So if we look at 1, it says it correctly. It says a decrease in the price of airline tickets led to an increase in the quantity demanded. We're moving along the curve. Okay, so here the correct answer is B, the first statement only. Okay, is that clear?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, third question. So don't get too worried about it. It's a very busy diagram, but it's not so hard. I think you only use a part of it. So here we're told that a shift of the demand curve for energy efficient light bulbs, that's what is on here. That's what this demand curve is drawn for. From D to D2, so we're looking at D to D2, it could be caused by which of the following? I'll open up a poll here. Okay, go ahead. Okay, I'll start my countdown. 3, 2, 1. All right. Okay, you can see the poll, right? Oh, wait, no, here we go. Okay, very good job. So almost all of you got it correct. So A is not right because it's talking about a movement along the curve. Okay, and we're, the question asks for the shift, what's causing it to going from D to D2. And B, C, and D all refer to a shift to the right in the demand curve. So if you read all of these, they will, suggest that the curve would have shifted to the right. The only one that correctly mentions a scenario that would shift it to the left is E. Okay, so the correct answer is E. Next question, so this is the supply curve, and it's saying a supply curve is a representation of the relationship. Okay, this is just Latin for holding it constant, ceteris paribus. So all else constant between quantity supplied of a product. And so this one, I think everyone should get perfect. It's a little tricky because of the wording, but I'll see if you can get it. So, we're just talking about, what space are we drawing the supply curve in? We're drawing it in the quantity and price space, right? So which one correctly does that? Oh, okay, so so those are the results. So, good job. Most of you got it. But when we're talking about the supply curve, are we talking about the quantity demanded? No, we're talking about the quantity supplied. So the supply curve is a representation between the quantity supplied and, of course, the price. So D is the correct answer. So the product's own price. Sometimes we say the own price just to distinguish it from the price of a related good or something like that. So that's maybe a little tricky because of the wording here. But yeah, it's just the price of the good itself and the quantity supplied. That's the supply curve. Okay, so here we're told that there was a fall in the price of raw milk, and that is used in the production of ice cream. Okay, so we basically have a fall of an input price, and so what will that result in? Okay, 3, 2, 1, and 0. Okay, so the correct answer here is C. So this is the only one that correct. So we know that a fall in an input price shifts the supply curve to the right. And when it shifts to the right, we would say an increase in supply. We wouldn't say an increase in the quantity supply, for example, because that would be a movement along the curve. Okay, next question. We got a graph similar to before, but now we have the supply curve for the energy efficient light bulbs. And so it's saying the movement along the supply curve S from point A, which is here, to point C, be caused by which of the following? Okay, go ahead. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Someone didn't get their response in. Do you want to get it in? Okay. Okay, so just looking at this, so first of all, we know we're moving along the curve from point A to point C. So any of these things listed that are related to a shift in the supply curve are incorrect, right? So A is a change in an input price, which shifts the curve. We know that's not correct. We go down to E, that's a change in the price of ordinary, that's the change in the price of a related good, which won't shift the supply curve, that would shift the demand curve. D, again, is talking about a shift in the supply curve. It's just saying there's more suppliers, so that would shift the supply curve to the right. And C, again, talks about a movement along the curve, but in the incorrect direction. For C to be true, we would have to move from C to A, not from A to C. And so the correct answer is B. Okay, and the last question, let me just open the poll. Okay, suppose we observe an increase in the price of good A and an increase in the quantity of good A exchanged. Which of the following is a likely explanation? Okay, 3, 2, 1, and 0. Okay, yeah, good job. Most of you got it right. So this was actually a little tricky. when you read it at first, you might be thinking about a movement along the curve, which, would normally make sense. But the thing is here, if it was a movement along the curve, this part here would say in the quantity demanded of good A. But since it says the quantity of good A exchanged, the only way anything's exchanged is if we have our market with the supply and the demand curve. The only way we can determine how much, when we just look at the demand curve, we can't say anything about what would be purchased or bought, right? The demand curve by itself is just showing the relationship between prices and quantity demanded. It's what if. What if the price is that? Only when you have the supply and the demand curve together can we say anything about what would actually be purchased. And so we know then there must be a supply curve. And so when the only way this could be true is if the demand curve shifted to the right for good A, because then, the quantity would increase, the quantity exchange. Remember, in equilibrium, the quantity demanded is equal to the quantity supplied. So, okay, so let's switch over now to elasticity. We'll just cover a little bit of it. Up till now, we didn't say anything about the slopes of these demand or supply curves. So elasticity is a measure of how much buyers and sellers respond to changes in price. So we know the law of demand states that it's an inverse relationship. So if the price were to fall, we would buy more. But we didn't say anything about how much more. If the price changes, how much more would you buy? Same with supply. We know firms would respond in a positive way to a price increase, offer more for sale, but we don't say how much more. So elasticity is about the degree of sensitivity of consumers and firms to a change in the price. Just think intuitively, if, what is the price of cigarettes now? It's something like almost $20 a pack. If it's a good one, like $18. The price has increased a lot. But if it went up another dollar, the quantity demanded probably wouldn't change all that much. But if you were to think of something like green and yellow beans at the grocery store beside each other, if the price of yellow beans went up by $1, probably and let's say the price is 50 cents for both, and then all of a sudden one of them goes up by $1, so $1.50 compared to 50 cents. Probably no one would buy the one that increase because they're very similar goods. So the nature of the good itself, different goods by their nature, whatever they are, will have different, consumers will be different in terms of their sensitivity to price changes. So if we were to draw a very relatively flat demand curve, and then we think about a given price change, well, for this demand curve, for this given price change, the quantity is going to change by quite a bit. Okay, so in this case, we would say the demand is elastic, or in other words, the consumers are quite sensitive to price changes because the change in the price results in a very large change in the quantity demanded. So this could be something like the yellow and green beans because they're almost identical. You could substitute one for the other. Even a small price change in the one will a price change in any of the two will result in the quantity demanded of the one with that price increase to fall a lot. So, when you have one phrase you can think of in general when you're talking about elasticity is whether or not you can easily do without the good or substitute the good. So if you have a good that you can easily do without, or you can easily substitute it, the consumers are going to be very price sensitive because they have options. They could buy something else or they can just do without. But if you have something that's not easy to substitute or not easy to do without, then the quantity is not going to change all that much for a change in the price. Like gas, just think of gasoline in general for your car. The price could change a lot and your quantity demanded isn't going to change much at all because it's not to do without or substitute. But it depends on the context. If you think about the elasticity of demand for a particular gas station's gas, then it's more elastic because you have lots of substitutes. You can go to any other gas station that's nearby. So they can't really have too much of a deviation in their prices. So when you have a relatively flat slope, we say it's, more elastic. It's elastic demand, so it's very stretchy and changing. So buyers are sensitive to prices. So when I draw a demand curve that's very flat, when I'm drawing that, I'm representing a good where the consumers are sensitive to the price. On the other hand, if I were to draw a very, more steep demand curve, and let's look at that exact same price change for this demand curve, the quantity would only change by this, a very small amount. Okay, so that's the idea in general of elasticity. So we would say this is a relatively inelastic demand curve, and this is a relatively elastic demand curve overall. But we can also look at elasticity along a demand curve. Along any demand curve, you will have a portion that we'll call inelastic and elastic. But overall, though, a very steep curve, you're going to get the responsiveness being very low and responsiveness being very high along this. So anyways, let's and this is just the phrase I mentioned earlier. So the key when you're thinking about just in general elasticity, you're thinking about whether it's easy to do without or easy to substitute. Now there's a very elasticity in general is calculated by this simple formula here. This is just the percentage change, sorry, not just the change, but the percentage change in the quantity with respect to the percentage change in the price. Okay, so let's just think about what this means. So if you have a very small or low percentage change in price, let's say there's a 5% increase in the price. Well, if that leads to a very little percentage change in the quantity, say less than 5%. So if the price increased 5% and that led to a 1% decrease in the percentage change in the quantity, then we would say that's pretty inelastic. But if a 5% increase in the price led to a 20% reduction in the quantity, percentage change in quantity, then that would be elastic. So that's the general formula. And so can anyone tell me why this will always be negative? If we think, this is and again, we're just focusing on demand, the demand curve. So this is the elasticity of demand. Why would this always be negative? Anyone?
Because it's negative sloping?
Yep, exactly. So if you got an increase in price, you're going to have a decrease in the quantity. If you have a decrease in P, you're going to have an increase in Q. You're always either going to have a negative on the top or bottom and a positive on the other one. So it's always going to be negative. Okay. And so sometimes when we write the elasticity of demand, we'll just ignore the negative sign. So sometimes you'll see it without the negative sign. That's just because it's always going to be negative. Now, a bit of an issue. So let's just review percentage change for a sec, because I sometimes find students forget that. So let's just do a simple example. Let's suppose the price of a can of Coke is $3 at a convenience store and $2 at the grocery store. So this, I'll put a G for the grocery store, and this is the convenience store. So if I asked you, in terms of a percent, how much more expensive is a can of Coke at the convenience store compared to the grocery store? How would I figure that out? Anyone?
How much more is sorry, what was the question? How much more?
In terms of a percent, how much more expensive is the can of Coke at the convenience store compared to the grocery store?
Well, 3 minus 2 divided by 3.
Yeah, so the formula I like to remember is just new minus old over old. So a percentage change is just the change, which is this, as a proportion of what it was before. It depends on the context. So here we're not talking about time.
Sorry, the formula is top screen. Which formula is this?
For a percentage change. So this is just an aside, right? I'm just refreshing your memory on how to calculate a percentage change. So we typically do new minus old over old and then multiply that by 100. So maybe let's, you know what, I think I'm going to do another example that's probably a little better. So let's think about gasoline prices. So let's say, we'll use the 3 and 2 again, but let's just assume that gasoline is not expensive. So let's suppose that yesterday, the price of gasoline was $3 a liter. And then today, it is, so this is today, it's $2 a liter. So if I asked you how much more expensive was gasoline yesterday compared to today, how would you calculate that? Well, you would use the formula new minus old. I'll just do an O for old over old. So in this case, we would take 2, subtract 3, right? So today it's $2. Yesterday it was 3. and then we divide it by yesterday. So this is just the change, the price changed by $1, okay? In this case, it's negative, and we're going to divide that by 3. So then we multiply it by 100. And so yesterday, the price of gas was 33.3% lower, right? Now, if I ask you how much, sorry, it's been a long day. So it's 33%. It was 33% higher yesterday, right? So gasoline was $3 yesterday. Today it's $2. So if I ask you how much, more expensive was it yesterday compared to today, it was 33% more expensive. And so to do that, we just take the new number, which is 2, the old number, which was 3, and divide it by 3. So the price changed by $1, and as a proportion of what it was yesterday, that's why you divide by 3, you get 33%. But now if I ask you how much cheaper is it today compared to yesterday, you would do, depends on the context. So when I did this here, I'm looking at how much the change was today compared to yesterday. Okay, so we do 2 minus 3 over 3, and then we get 33%. So the price change was, a decrease of 33%. Now, if I look at how much the price was yesterday compared to today, so I'm maybe thinking in terms of a percent, how much higher was it yesterday compared to today, then I would do 3 minus 2 over 2. So this number in the denominator is sort of what's it relative to. So here I'm comparing it to yesterday, here I'm comparing it to today, and we get a different number. So this is going to be positive 1/2, and so it's 50%. Okay, so it was 50% more expensive yesterday, but it's 33% cheaper today. And these aren't the same. So when you're doing the key point here is when you're doing a percentage change, it matters what direction you're talking about. Okay. So the reason why I bring up percentage change here is because that's what we're using to calculate elasticity. The elasticity of demand is the ratio of the percentage change in the quantity demanded with respect to a percentage change in price. And so if we look, so let me just clear this stuff here off. If I calculate the elasticity from a price of $3 to $4, so if I go from $3 to $4, so, and just looking at here, we know that if the price goes from $3 to $4, the quantity demanded will go from 500 to 250. And so if I calculate the elasticity based on this formula, I will get negative 1.5. So all I'm doing here is plugging in the value. So what's the percentage change in the quantity here? Well, it's the new quantity because the price increased, right? The new quantity is 250. The old quantity was 500. So it's this change divided by what it was before, which was 500. So in terms of a percent, this is 50%. So the quantity fell by 50%. It was 500 and cut in half. So it's 50%. So that's the numerator. And now what about the price? The price went from $3 to $4. Well, at $3, an increase of 1 represents a change of 33%. So to calculate it, we get 4 minus 3 over 3. And that's what's on the bottom. And we get 0.33. And so if we're thinking about the elasticity of demand from $3 to $4 along this demand curve, it's negative 1.5. And so basically in words, we're saying that if the price goes up by 33%, the quantity demanded will fall by 50%. Okay. Now, you would think that if I did the same thing, but I just changed it from going from 4 to 3, I would get the same answer, but you won't. That's what I was trying to illustrate before. So if we go from 4 to 3, then in the numerator, we're going to have 500 minus 250 divided by 250. So why do we get that? Well, now we're saying the price is originally $4, and at $4, the quantity demanded would be 250. And then the price falls to $3, and the quantity demanded is going to increase to 500. Well, going from 250 to 500, the quantity has doubled here. So that's a 100% change. So 500 minus 250 over 250 is equal to 100%. Now the price went from 4 to 3. The change is still $1, but we were at a higher level. So $1 represents a less of a change in terms of a percent. Here we would calculate the percentage change in the price as being new minus old over old. So the new number is 3. It fell from 4. That's the old number. So 3 minus 4, and then we divide by the old number, which is 4. That's a 25% decrease. And so our elasticity would be equal to -4. So all you need to know for this is that we don't like this. It's confusing. So what we're going to do when we calculate elasticity, we're not going to do this. We're going to use the midpoint method. And all the midpoint method all it does is use for these denominators the average of the two numbers, right? So if you look here, if you look at both of these, you'll notice that in absolute value, the change is always the same. The quantity changed by 250, right? Whether positive or negative. The price changed by $1, but it was either positive or negative, depends on the direction. So the number in the numerator is the same no matter which way you do it, except that there would be differences in signs. We don't care much about the signs because we know this thing will always be negative. But what's different here is the denominators, right? Here we're using 500, here we're using 250, here we're using 3, here we're using 4. So what we're going to do is just, for the denominators here, we're just going to use the average of the two numbers. So instead of dividing by 500 or 250, we're just always going to divide by the average of 250 and 500, which is 375. And we're always going to divide by the average of the price. Here, the average would be the average of 3 and 4. So it would be 3.5. So it's going to be exactly what's in the middle. So here would be 375, and the middle of this is 3.5. And so when we do that, we'll always get the same answer, okay? So instead of using the standard percentage change, we're going to just change it so that the denominator is the average of either the quantity or the price. So, so this is the example here. So now what we're going to do instead is, for the numerator, it'll still be the same. It'll be the 250. So we're just going to put the change in Q. Forget about the sign. We'll just put 250, okay? But we're going to divide by 375. 375 is simply just the average of these two numbers. For the percentage change in price, we're going to just take the change in the price and then divide it by the average price, which is 3.5. If we do that, we'll get that the elasticity is -2.3. Okay, so you could put the sign in here. If this is negative, this has to be positive. If this is negative, that has to be positive. So you put it in or not, it doesn't, we always know it's going to be negative. So we're a little bit sloppy with putting the signs here, but it doesn't matter. We're going to get just, for the sake of, doing tests, and you want to make sure you're just always following a standard procedure, you could put in you could just put in negative here or a positive there, or it won't matter, right? Because we're not saying what direction we're going in here. We're just taking the average. So in this case, actually what you basically want to do is just follow this formula, put the change in the quantity, put the change in the price. Don't care about the signs because we don't know if it's, what direction. Put in the average quantity, the average price, you calculate it, and you can always just stick a negative in front of it because we know it's a demand curve and the elasticity is always going to be negative. So in this case, it's -2.5. So what we did is that so basically if you're doing it this way, if we go from 3 to 4, then the elasticity here is -1.5. If we go from 4 to 3, it's -4. But as if you think of points that are very close to each other, the numbers are going to be sort of similar. But what we're going to do is just calculate what the elasticity would be at this point right in the center. That's what this formula will do. And so the elasticity between these 2 points, we're going to say is -2.3. Okay, and just in words, what does that mean? Well, if we increase the price by whatever this is in terms of a percent, it will change the quantity demanded by 2.3 times that amount. Okay, so let's do an example here. So here's a numerical example. Let me just put the animation back in here. Okay, so we have a product, it's cheese. We have the original price, we have the new price. We're told the average price. We don't need to be told it because we could just look at this and we know that the average is exactly what's in between. which would be 4. We know that when the price is $5, the quantity was 116,250. The new quantity, so at, this new price of $3, at this new price of $3, the quantity is 123,750. The average of these two numbers is 120,000. So how do we calculate elasticity? Well, we just use that formula and plug everything in. So on the top, we know that the change in the quantity is just the difference between these two numbers. So 123,750 minus 60,250. And then, so that's the, the change in the quantity. And we just divide that by the average. The average is 120. For the price, the difference in the price is $2. We divide that by the average, which is 4. Work it out, we get 0.125. Okay, so that would be the elasticity here. So again, we'll talk about this in a moment, but if this number is less than 1, we say it's inelastic. If it's greater than 1, we say it's elastic. And this very small number is suggesting that the quantity doesn't change all that much with respect to the price change. So here, this is a 50% fall. Or no, sorry, this should be. Oh yeah, sorry. Because we're using the midpoint average, this is a very large price change. In terms of the way we calculated this with the average, it's a 50% reduction. And the quantity, the percentage change in the quantity is very small. It's only 0.0625. So, a 50% change in the price leads to a much less change in the quantity demanded. So, and it's actually very small. You just take this and multiply it by that and you get that. So let's just, I think we'll finish up soon. This is quite a bit of material. It gets a little easier. This is probably the more difficult part of the elasticity. The rest is a little more lighter. But let's do this a couple more slides and then we'll finish up. So question here, it's saying, suppose that the price of product increased from $18 to $22. The quantity demanded decreased from 63 to 57. So you're given all the information here you need, and it just wants you to calculate the price elasticity of demand. And again, you're using that formula, the midpoint formula, and I'll actually just write it on here for you. So it's going to be the change in the quantity divided by the average quantity, and you're going to take that and divide it by the change in the price divided by the divided by the average. So this is a P, and then we have average. Okay, so you just need to figure out what these are, plug it in, and you get the answer. Does anyone want to give that a try? I'll put up a poll. Okay, go ahead.
Quick question in regards to exams and that with all the math. Are we able to use Excel, or do we have to just do it by written hand? Just so I'm practicing it right from day one, right away.
I mean, for this, you could. I would just use your calculator. Because you're probably going to be using your screen. For the quizzes, I'm not going to use the lockdown browser. Those are going to be a little less formal. But for the midterm and final exam, you're going to have oh yeah, this is Max. Sorry, I teach at Laurier as well. I have to get familiar with this. What's it called?
Proctor.
Yeah. Sorry, what is it?
It's proctored exams. So basically, they watch us while we're doing the exam and make sure you're not cheating.
Okay.
So I was asking if we could use Excel at the same time.
Yeah, so I got to look into it more. I'm not sure if it's like a lockdown browser, because if it is, then you can't open up any other software, right?
Okay.
But I would just use a calculator. A dot programmable calculator will be all you need. This is about as much calculations you're going to do for the entire course. We might do a little bit of algebra for the but probably not.
I've never seen more letters and symbols in math in my life.
Okay, now this is pretty light, but it's not going to get worse than this. This is, actually, this is probably the last time you'll see Greek letters in this course. So it's just this chapter, this beginning part has these, but nothing's complicated here. Like the delta just means, instead of writing change, I just put a triangle, so I don't have to, it's just a short form, right? So otherwise it's just dividing two numbers. It's not very, and I never mentioned before, I didn't choose this textbook. this textbook is one of the most, it's the more rigor. It's what you would use at Laurier first year or University of Toronto. It's one of the more serious economics texts for first year. I didn't choose it. Whoever did this before did. So it's a bit of a, the concepts aren't that much different, but this is a pretty difficult textbook is what I'm trying to say. So I'm completely aware of that. But anyways, don't worry. Like at the most, you're going to have to do a little bit of algebra. That's it. That would be the hardest thing. So yeah, I'm not sure of your math backgrounds. To me, that it's not much, but everyone has a different background. But yeah, you would just need a calculator. You don't need, Excel would be helpful maybe for this. It would give you can calculate it a few seconds faster, but at the end of the day, you'll be allowed to have a blank sheet of paper to sketch out and write stuff. Okay, so you'll be fine with just a calculator. I hope does that answer your question? Or
Yeah.
okay, so let's just get the answer to this. So did anyone figure it out?
Yeah.
I think that's right. So can't remember, but let's see. Let me just get this off.
B.
B. I think. Oh yeah, I have it here. So again, all you're doing is you're just taking the difference in the quantity, dividing it by the average quantity. You can look at this and know the average, right? Because it's just the number that's in between, which is 60. If you were to think of this on a line, 57 and then 63, what's in the middle? Well, 60. That's the average. But you can just calculate it too. You just add them together and divide it by 2. And then for the price, again, just the difference, which is 4, and you divide it by the average. You can look at this and know that the average is 20. And then you just divide these, divide that, divide the whole thing, and you get negative 0.5. That's it. And so unless otherwise, well, actually you won't be asked to do elasticity unless it's using this formula. And then all you got to do is, okay, what's the point of this? What's all these numbers here? Well, what do we calculate? Well, you just calculate how much the quantity changes with respect to the price. But it's the percentage change. So we're saying here. So this number tells you that if, for example, the price went up by 10%, the quantity demanded would only change by half of that, so 5%. If it went up by 20%, it would only change by 10%. That's all this is saying here. This is, it's half. 0.5 is half. So the percentage change in the quantity will be half of what the percentage change in the price is. Okay? Okay, we'll just do one more question because it's really related to what I just said. So what happened to the price if did I have a poll open for that? Or no, I didn't. Because that was never mind. I'll open a poll for this one. Okay, so what has happened to the price if the price elasticity of demand is 2 and quantity demanded increases by 10%? Now let me give you a hint. So we know that the general formula is the percentage change in Q over the percentage change in the price is equal to the elasticity of demand. Here we're told that it's negative 2. So we're told that this is 10%, and we're just asked what this is, right? So we can figure that out. We know that, if we move this over, we could rewrite this as negative 2 times the percentage change in P equals 10%. And so we just move that under here. Percentage change in the price is equal to 10 divided by 2 equals 5. And, so here we know that the quantity demanded increased by 10%. We know that's 2, so then this must have been half of that. So here, if the price increased by 5%, then the percentage change in the quantity demanded would be 10%, twice that amount. Okay? Is that clear?
Yeah.
And so that's the answer. Okay, so we'll call it a night.